Verse 20 says, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. So you have to remember that Joseph is anchored in righteousness. And because he is anchored in righteousness, Joseph doesn't storm out and go to the bar. Y'all better listen to me now. He didn't storm out and go to the frat house and get around 6 other men going through their own trouble, who are relishing in their own trouble. Because let me tell you something, you have to be careful. You can get around the wrong folk, and they can put their kerosene on your fire. Anybody ever been in a situation where you got around the wrong folk and they transferred their trouble on you, and your trouble became worse because you took what they had to say and put it in your situation? But because he was a righteous man, he was able to hear from the divine. And let me tell you, some righteousness will position you to hear from the divine. When you are standing on the bedrock of trying your best to embody the character of God, God will talk to you for yourself. How many folk know what I'm talking about in here? Is there anybody under the sound of my voice who has ever been in a situation where you needed God to speak to you? I'm not talking about your neighbor. I'm not talking about your family member. I'm not talking about somebody I'm talking about you needed God to speak to you. And let me tell you something. If you have relationship with God through Jesus Christ, God will talk to you for yourself. God can speak to you through other people, but how many folk have lived long enough to see God speak to you for yourself? You're not talking about something you thought he said. You're talking about what you know that he said to you for yourself. And if you get hooked up to him, you can hear from him. Let me tell you something now. I can't tell you if God is a bass, a tenor, baritone, lyric tenor. I can't tell you none of that. But what I can tell you is that God will speak to your heart. How many folk have God spoken to your heart? And how many folks you knew that it was nobody but God? Nobody could tell you anything else. They said you were crazy. They said you were foolish, but you knew that it was nobody but God. And when God tells you to do something and you know it is nobody but God, don't you let any demon in hell, don't you let some well-meaning person who doesn't know what God is telling you try to convince you otherwise, because when God has ordained something to be, God will see it through. It may not come in your timing. Our foreparents say he may not come when you want him, but when he comes, he's always on time. Is that anybody's testimony? And when God tells you something, God will seal what he says. In reading one of the writings of Dr. Lewis Baldwin on Dr. King, he talks about a man, Dr. King, who was etched in the righteousness of justice. And then Dr. King needed to hear from God. And he says, as the threats poured in, his fears increased for his wife, Coretta, and for their infant daughter, Yolanda. He now wondered how he could relinquish his role in the boycott, talking about Montgomery bus boycott, as the boycott leader without appearing as a coward. It says, then something happened. How many know that something will happen? It says, then something happened that King would talk about for years afterward. He bowed over his untouched cup of coffee and prayed aloud in desperation. King said he heard an inner voice that addressed him by name and encouraged him to stand up for justice. Let me tell you something. When you talk to God, he will call you by your name so that you will know who he's talking to, so that you will know how many folk know what I'm talking about. He will call you by your name, tell you what needs to be said, and then he'll give you the strength to stand up and to do what he has called you to do. How many have experienced that supernatural strength? I heard Pastor Goodwin one time preach that God will help you to stand when everything else is falling apart all around you. And I believe there are a few folks that know about that God helps you to stand sometime when everything else that's falling around. That's why they used to sing in the old church, so many falling by the wayside. Lord, help me to stand. Is there anybody who's ever seen God help you to stand?